Mes ginsimės iki paskutinės minutės. Mes ginsim savo radiją ir televiziją.
Ta naktį buvo paleisti 7 šūviai į Lietuvos laisvę ir nepriklausomybę.
40 dienų paieškų pagaliau surasta dingusi Vajagų šeima.
2 million residents of the Baltic states linked hands to protest not only what happened 50 years ago, but to send a message of defiance.
April 4th, 1975. Vilnius, the capital of Soviet-occupied Lithuania, was waking up to a spring. The streets were damp, carrying the scent of thawed earth, while factories hummed in the background. Just another evening under Soviet rule. Passengers boarded the Vilnius-Kaunas train, their thoughts already on their destinations. Students eager for a short break, weary workers longing for home, families reuniting for the weekend. Train number 513, pulled by a hulking TE-3 diesel locomotive, sat waiting. A Soviet-built twin-section machine. Its 2 strokes, 10-cylinder engine growled beneath the layers of steel, designed for both freight and passengers. At 4:30 p.m., those engines roared to life. The wheels screeched, metal grinding against metal, as the train rolled forward, carrying its passengers towards what would soon be described by those who witnessed it as hell. The train consisted of 4 passenger cars, each built for efficiency rather than comfort. Soviet trains typically carried a mix of platzkartny, third-class open sleepers, and общий, common-class seated wagons, cramming in as many passengers as possible. Depending on the configuration, the train's capacity ranged from 260 seated passengers to nearly 400 with standing room, a packed metal shell hurtling through the Lithuanian's countryside. Inside, the passengers represented a microcosm of life under Soviet rule. Factory workers, their clothes still smelling of grease and sweat, sat beside students animatedly discussing politics. Families huddled together, some chatting, others dozing. The air was thick with the scent of cheap Soviet cigarettes, the hum of low conversations, and the rhythmic clatter of wheel against the tracks. For nearly an hour, the journey was uneventful. The steady chug of locomotive, the swaying of carriages, and the blur of pine forest outside made it easy to believe this was just another routine trip. But most of them had only 5 minutes to live. That fateful day, Nijolė Sakalauskaitė, a Kaunas doctor, was heading home from Vilnius University. Having just missed the earlier train, she found herself waiting for the one that's going to be scarred in her memory forever. The diesel train, packed with passengers, finally arrived in the late afternoon. She boarded the second carriage from the locomotive. I remember a flicker in the otherwise clear sky as I boarded, she later recalled, a dark cloud that seemed out of place. Until Žasliai, she has been quietly reading Švyturys, a popular magazine. At nearly 70 kilometers an hour, the train approached Žasliai station. The platform light flickered, oblivious to disaster racing towards them. Station workers, used to the blur of passing trains, paid little attention. Inside the carriages, conversations continued. Up ahead, a fuel tanker sat motionless on the main track. It wasn't supposed to be there. Cargo train number 2719 has been shuttered onto the side tracks earlier to make way for the faster passengers train. But one crucial mistake, one negligent oversight, had left its last car, a fuel tanker, dangerously sticking out of the main line. A miscalculation, a failure of a safety check, and a Soviet bureaucracy too indifferent to notice. In a moment, train number 513 would smash into that fuel tanker at full speed. There was no time to stop, no chance to swerve. Metal met metal in a sickening collision, a deafening screech followed by an impact that shook the ground. The fuel tanker, Buckled under the force, its steel shell rupturing like paper, damping every passenger car full of gasoline. And then, fire. A blinding explosion split the evening sky, swallowing the train in a hellish inferno. Flames poured from the wreckage, surging through the carriages like a living thing, turning seats, luggage, and bodies into fuel. The night lit up in a monstrous glow. Žasliai has become hell in an instant. The equipment failed. I saw the fuel tanker when it was already very close, right in front of me. The disaster was unavoidable, the train driver later recounted. He survived, but lost several fingers in the explosion. The first 3 carriages took the full force of the blast. The locomotive and the first passenger car derailed, while the third car became fused in the burning tanker, subjected to the most intense flames. Windows burst from the pressure, sending shards of glass flying. Doors twisted shut in the heat, trapping passengers inside. All around, chaos reigned. Almost immediately, shouts of "we're burning" filled the air, but smoke poured in, choking everybody, reducing desperate screams to straggled gasps. Some tried to pry open the door, others smashed at the windows with bare hands, stones, anything. But the heat warped the frame, sealing many inside their burning tombs. Polyester raincoats melted to skin, nylon stocking fused to legs. Sakalauskaitė was still conscious. She grabbed her smoldering coat and handbag, jumping through the open door to escape. She remembers watching burning survivors being swollen by flames, the melting synthetic fabric of their raincoats fusing to their skin, impossible to tear off. When I stopped near a small building and turned back, the front carriages were engulfed in flames, she recalled. She stood there, paralyzed by shock, before following the survivors running down the road. Black cars, likely government or security officials, sped across the field, adding to the eerie sense of urgency to the whole scene. Bystanders could only watch in horror. One witness recalls that day. There were cracking sounds and the roar of fire. Someone was trying to smash the windows with stones. Others were pounding on them from the inside. Even those who escaped looked terrible. Some had no jackets, some with burned hair, others had scorched palms. Žasliai was a quiet town of barely 2,000 people, but on that night, no one slept. The blast was heard kilometers away, the sky glowing red as if the sun has risen again. Smoke choked the air. People ran towards the fire. Factory workers, farmers, housewives, many still in their work clothes, sprinted down dirt roads, across railway tracks, towards the disaster. They brought blankets, water, anything they could carry. What they found was beyond comprehension. Survivors staggered from the wreckage, their clothes smoldering, their skin blackened and raw. Some collapsed from the pain, their voices too harsh to scream anymore. Others never made it out. One local was quoted, "People were burning alive. Their screams haunt me to this day." Rescuers pulled at bodies, but skin peeled away in their hands. Workers from Žasliai wood processing plant rushed to help as one pregnant woman's arm was trapped under the wreckage. Locals pried the metal apart and freed her. Mothers threw their children out of the window, while students tossed their musical instruments to safety. The heat was so intense, no one could approach the carriage nearest to the ruptured fuel tanker. Local resident Teodoras Romanovas took charge of the rescue effort, halting buses and directing them to transport the burned victims to nearby hospital. His wife, Bronė, who managed the first aid station, worked tirelessly, bandaging the survivors with sheets she tore from her own home. Remarkably, no one died at the aid station. All those in critical need of care were transported to the hospital in time. Dr. Jonas Novikas, a doctor from Kaišiadorys Central Hospital, was himself on the train, but joined the rescue efforts, assisting the wounded. In the first hour alone, around 80 burn victims were taken to Kaišiadorys, while countless others were rushed to hospitals across the region. The third carriage, utterly consumed by flame, was thought to have claimed every passenger aboard. No bodies were found intact, only ash and the remnant of what had once been human life. The third carriage burned so completely that almost no human bones remain. It was impossible to count the victims even from the bone fragments, wrote journalist Jonas Laurinavičius in Ugnies Giltinė, The Fire Reaper. Among those who stayed behind to save others was Arvydas Garnys, a Žasliai resident. After saving 3 children, he went back in for a friend, but never came out. His body, like many others, was unrecognizable. The families of Garnys and Antanas Vizbaras of Raseiniai ultimately divided the cremated remains between them, each burying an urn in their family cemetery. Firefighters from Kaišiadorys, Elektrėnai, Jonava, Kaunas, and Kėdainiai arrived, but the fire raged for 15 hours. Only military firefighters managed to finally extinguish it. Even after the smoke cleared, questions remained. Some witnesses claimed there were soldiers and Kaliningrad students aboard, victims never listed in the official reports. What was certain was that this was not just an accident. It was a disaster born of negligence, of a system that didn't care until it was too late. Amongst the passengers of that ill-fated train was Kaunas actor and director Memertas Karklelis, who, against all odds, survived the inferno. His wife, actress Danguolė Baukaitė Karklienė, would later recount how he was returning home from the Vilnius television station, accompanied by architect Mildas. Karklelis suffered severe burns, but his natural fiber clothing, an unlikely savior, helped him avoid being consumed by the flames. After being rushed to Kaunas for treatment, he managed to call home himself. When his wife picked up the phone, she didn't yet grasp the gravity of the situation. Karklelis has been sitting in the second carriage, a popular choice for regular commuters on the Kaunas-Vilnius route. Tragically, few from the carriage escaped the flames. Among those believed to have perished was the wife of A. Valiulis, a Kaunas musical theater ballad artist. Her husband, Valiulis, identified his wife by her wedding ring alone. Also lost was Rima Paviljonytė, the sister of Independence Act signatory Vidmantas Paviljonis. She has been rushing home from Vilnius University to take care of her sick parents when the disaster struck. The flames also claimed Aldona Griniūtė Žukauskienė, a relative of Lithuanian's President Kazimieras Grinius. As noted by Laurinavičius, her remains were identified only by a monogrammed wristwatch. Her husband, who was traveling with her, survived. Among the victims were Kęstutis Barbenskas, a student at the then Polymetric Institute, now Kaunas University of Technology, or KTU, Gintautas Masaitis, a lecturer at the same institute, and Juozas Antanavičius, an employee of the then History Museum, now the War Museum. Both Masaitis and Antanavičius died trying to rescue fellow passengers. Nijolė Sakalauskaitė survived that day, but by the time she arrived home, her mother didn't recognize her. She spent the next weeks at home, plagued by the nightmares, the horrors of that day forever imprinted on her mind. Even now, she admits, "I'm afraid to board a train, though I'd like to take the new one to Vilnius." To understand why the Žasliai disaster happened, we first need to grasp the extent of the Soviet negligence of Lithuania railways and the brutal consequence this negligence had for the people. Before Soviet occupation, Lithuania had a well-established railway network that was efficiently operated and built to European standards. But in the 1940s, after annexation, the Soviets imposed a forceful conversion of the system to the Soviet broad gauge, integrating it into the larger USSR railway network. This move wasn't just about standardization, it was about control, creating a system that would keep Lithuania connected to the USSR while severing its ties to Europe. The aim was clear: to erase any semblance of independence. The exploitation of the Lithuanian railway network by the Soviets was nothing short of ruthless. The entire system fell under the strict supervision of the Soviet military and security forces, particularly the KGB, which restricted local decision-making. Railways, once designed to serve the people, now existed primarily to serve the needs of Soviet military. By the 1970s, Lithuanian rail system was barely functioning. Tracks, switches, and signaling equipment were outdated and in disrepair. Soviet authorities had little interest in updating or maintaining stations. Locomotives were running far past their service time, and safety features like rail switches were frequently faulty. The most egregious failure, however, was that freight and passenger trains were sharing the same track without proper safety measures in place. The Žasliai disaster, where this fatal collision occurred, was the horrifying result of this deadly oversight. After the disaster, the Soviet system went into overdrive to find someone to blame, not to fix the underlying problems, but to satisfying the needs for retribution. Investigators quickly targeted a railway dispatcher and a track foreman, scapegoating them to the tragedy. The official report of the disaster was brief, as expected, offering condolences without addressing the systemic failures that led to this catastrophe. Within days, they named those responsible: Stasys Urbonavičius, the dispatcher, and Motiejus Šiško, the foreman, were sentenced to prison for their roles in the incident, 13 years for Urbonavičius and 3 for Šiško. But the truth was far murkier. A malfunction in the signaling system had failed to alert the men that the cargo train was still occupying the live track. Railway workers petitioned for clemency, and after 7 years, Urbonavičius was released, though he had to repay a lot of damages, and his salary was docked. What happened to Šiško after his sentence remains unclear, lost in the fog of Soviet-era bureaucracy. When Lithuania regained independence in 1990, the real toll of this disaster started to emerge. It was revealed that the official death count was far lower than in reality. At least 20 people had died. Eyewitnesses suggest that the death toll was likely much higher. One hospital alone registered 80 victims, with many more transported to nearby facilities. Finally, in 1991, a wooden monument was erected at the site of the disaster, crafted by a local woodworker, Vidmantas Kapačiūnas, to honor the lives lost. A booklet documenting the events was published, and articles began to surface in the press, shedding light on a tragedy that has been buried in silence for far too long. As we close the chapter on Žasliai, let us truly remember that some scars, no matter how time-worn, never truly fade. The echoes of that day still reverberate in the heart of those who lived with the weight of what happened, a constant reminder that safety, vigilance, and respect for history should be taken seriously. We can't undo the past, but we can learn from it. Let's honor those lost by ensuring that their story is never forgotten, and that we take the lessons of Žasliai to heart, because in the end, the cost of negligence is far too high. Thank you for watching. If you found this video meaningful or just interesting, consider liking, sharing, and subscribing. It helps. Let's continue to remember, and I'll see you next time.